All right, so we are back, and I am here today to try to find my true love. Because true love is in the eyes of the beholder, and today I am going to try to learn from Dana White how to love someone the way he loves him some Jon Jones as the greatest of all time and the pound-for-pound best in the world. This argument seems to never die, and we got another installment of it at Dana White's Contender Series post-fight press conference last night. He addressed the elephant in the room, and that is the continuation of this debate whether Jon is deserving of the #1 pound-for-pound slot in the world currently. Is he the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world right now? Dana White's not moving off that opinion. I tend to think a little differently, but at the risk of Dana and my comment section telling me I don't know anything about MMA if I have that opposite opinion, let's listen to what he said and how he rationalizes this. Why the breakdown? Let's go.
Is Jon Jones the pound-for-pound GOAT?
Did what?
Is Jon Jones the pound-for-pound GOAT?
He's the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world, and he's the GOAT. And you all know this.
Okay, so there was the first thing I was going to try to separate from Dana there. He does separate that Jon is not only the GOAT, which I think, I mean, yeah, you can have different opinions. Jon Jones, potentially the greatest of all time. I think that. Some people think it's George St. Pierre. Some people think it's Anderson Silva. Some people think it's Khabib Nurmagomedov. I don't think that at all. I think it is Jon Jones. I think his resume, even if you want to say, okay, he fought guys that were middleweights that came up, they were still relatively, for the most part, in their prime or at the edge of it. And not only did Jon beat the guys that were in front of him while he was young at the light heavyweight division, he beat the generation before him. He beat his generation of fighters, and then he beat the next generation of fighters. Whether you want to say he lost to Dom Reyes or not, he got that decision. And the only loss on his record is a self-inflicted loss from Jon that, by the way, is no longer still a rule in MMA. I'm not saying he should get the win back. I'm just saying Jon is the only person that's ever beat Jon. He is the GOAT. But where I disagree is where Dana is trying to lump in GOAT status and the current pound-for-pound. Let's take a look more.
Numbers don't lie.
Does he have pictures of you?
Numbers don't lie.
I saw that on the internet, too. Are you guys that stupid? You can't be that stupid to think that Jon Jones is not the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world and the GOAT. But maybe you are.
He's not going to talk to any of us either, because right now...
What do you mean?
Because he's watching this, and we're all saying, you know, questioning you and...
MMA journalist that's talking to Dana. He's kind of been the guy leading this charge as the back and forths go. So fair play to him. He has stuck it on Dana a couple different times. I think he's about to do it again with this Jon Jones
At some point when you're looking at rankings, they do have to represent what's happening in the organization at that moment, right at that time. And in the past 3 years, he's had one fight.
And you thought he lost to Reyes.
Huh?
And when he fought Reyes, you said you thought Reyes won the fight.
He didn't win the fight. Jon Jones did.
But you said you thought he won the fight.
Who gives a shit? I'm not the judges. The guy didn't win he didn't lose the fight.
The main point right there, by the way, the great layout of the question from John Morgan, another high-esteemed MMA journalist, essentially is this. Dana White has, I don't even know, like I think his definition of pound for pound is different from what the people are saying to Dana, right? Like Dana's like, he's the pound for pound best fighter on the planet right now. But you heard him also say the numbers don't lie. The numbers don't lie. And he's referencing Jon's resume, right? His resume that, quite frankly, hasn't been updated outside of the Ciryl Gane fight, which was 18 months ago, in the better part of 4 years. So yes, he's right that those things matter. But also another point that was brought up that Dana White himself thought that Jon lost to Dom Reyes. Now, that doesn't mean a lot to me, but what John Morgan said about activity, right? He has not fought in 18 months. Again, Jon got injured. He was supposed to fight, and that's a point that I think Dana's going to bring up in a little bit. It's a good point, but you do have to, at some point, give credence to the people that aren't getting hurt, and not that that's Jon's fault, but they're continuing to fight. They're continuing to build their resume. And again, pound for pound does mean multiple weight classes, so I agree that Jon moving up to heavyweight does solidify him in those upper echelons of pound for pound. But when you do have multiple people fighting multiple times and Jon's on the shelf, it's hard not to give them more credence because they are adding to their resume currently. Not 18 months ago, not 4 years ago. Currently, they're adding to that resume. And I think that's the biggest delineation of what Dana White's talking about and what the media are saying back to him that cover this.
And the one loss that he has is from a referee that should have never been a referee in a million years. He's never lost. We were just talking tonight. These kids that come in here that are undefeated, you know how hard it is to stay undefeated? John Jones went through murderer's row. When you talk about activity, and he's fought one time, but John Jones was supposed to fight. If John Jones was sitting on the couch and saying, yeah, I don't know when I'm going to fight again, then he's definitely not in the pound-for-pound discussion right now. He was scheduled to fight, and he got injured. He is an active fighter.
It's a fair point. Like, again, I disagree with Dana, but the point he's making about John supposed to have been fighting and he fucked his shoulder up, it's a fair point to make. It's not fair to John that you penalize him for that, but I don't even look at putting John lower than someone like Islam Makhachev is a penalty. It's just a rewarding for a guy like Islam to be able to continue to be active and putting on dominant performances and winning fights on his way to being, in my opinion, the #1 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet right now. The only part that's interesting to me about this is the pound-for-pound aspect, because John moved to heavyweight, and that does make him a two-weight world champion pound for pound. That's a big deal. Again, that inactivity is the thing, because if John's winning fights at heavyweight, like continuously winning fights, let's say he didn't get hurt and he goes out and beats Stipe, you don't really have an argument. John's #1 pound for pound. But because there is no fights happening, you have to move people up. It's just the nature of the sport. The sport's going to keep going. If John's here, it's going to keep going on no matter if he's healthy or not. And also, again, I don't mean to ramble, but the other point about this is that John Jones was, for 4 years or 3 years before that, not taking fights. Not that he was necessarily, I guess, turning down fights, or I don't know what happened with the Francis Ngannou situation. Dana White himself kind of flip-flopped on that whole thing, saying that Francis wanted to fight John, and now he's saying that Francis never wanted to fight John, or he was scared, or insinuating that, and John always wanted it. There was 3 years there where John Jones was bulking his way to heavyweight, but that's inactivity. Taking 3 years to prepare to move up is John's own choice, but that is inactivity. And one fight after that, yes, that makes him an active fighter, but not in the same way as people taking 3 fights a year, 2 fights a year, whatever it is that we consider to be the top of the top at pound for pound right now.
When you talk about pound for pound, and I don't want to shit on any of my other guys, but who is it right now? Islam? Islam, many people believe, lost to the guy who's a weight class below him. Is that how pound for pound works? Many people, including people in this room.
But he got the win. It doesn't matter what we
say.
say.
You're absolutely right. But he fought a weight class down. John Jones fought a weight class up. And let me tell you what, when all the guys were in there, you had the John Jones, the Anderson Silvas, and the George St. Pierres. I know who wanted to fight who and who didn't want to fight who. And John Jones has always been willing to fight everybody.
That's an interesting point. Now, again, it doesn't really matter for what we're talking about currently. Dana White using the fact that John wanted to fight Anderson and wanted to fight George St. Pierre. It doesn't really make his point better, because it contradicts the point he just made. Right? He's like, well, I don't want to shit on my own guys, but Islam beat a guy smaller than him. Well, if John would have taken those fights against Anderson Silva, or I guess George St. Pierre, I don't know how the fuck that would happen, it would have been the same point that Dana is trying to use against Islam Makhachev, you could use against John. Like, okay, yeah, sure, he beat Anderson Silva, but he fought a weight class down. I honestly, if that fight would have ever happened, because Silva did move to 205 eventually, I think that would have been a massive thing for John Jones, right? But the point he's making is that John moving to heavyweight solidifies him more in the pound-for-pound discussion. I agree with it, but it doesn't just write off all of the nothing that's happened for 4 years outside of, again, the one fight and the dominant fight between him and Ciryl Gane. But then if you're going to put in context what that fight also was, it was John fighting a guy that had already lost the heavyweight championship of the world in a heavyweight championship fight to Francis Ngannou. So it's not that John beat the best heavyweight on the planet to become pound for pound heavyweight. He beat essentially a placeholder. And I hate to say that about Ciryl Gane, but that's what it is.
John Jones has fought everybody that's ever been put in front of him. He went through murderer's row, and if you look at who he fought at the time when he fought them, look at the record of the guys combined that he fought. And the list just goes on and on.
That makes him the greatest fighter of all time, not the greatest active fighter, because he is not an active fighter. He has fought one time in over 4 years.
Now, again, framing it as one time in the 4 years, he's right, but it's not that long ago. Like, that makes it in your mind seem like John only fought once 4 years ago, when in fact it was 18 months ago. It wasn't that long ago, and he was scheduled for another fight. But what Dana is saying makes John the pound-for-pound GOAT of all time, and especially at that time period where he was beating, Chael was a clear middleweight that had to move to 205. John beat him and broke his plateau at the same time. But the Lyoto Machidas, the Rampages, the Rashads, the Shoguns, the Daniel Cormiers, the Gustafsons, those guys at the time, those were massive, massive, massive wins and super impressive in the way he did it and who he did it against. But that's the same argument people are making for Islam right now. Because, again, using the point of him going through Murderer's Row, that's what Islam Makhachev is doing currently. That's why we give him that pound-for-pound number one right now. I like this back and forth we're getting into.
And he was going in to fight at heavyweight again.
Okay.
A weight class above.
But that's
and he fucking destroyed the guy who was the best guy in the division.
In the UFC, after that guy lost to Francis Ngannou. I'm not saying it wasn't impressive, but that context does matter.
And I think everybody here, if he was active, if he had fought one more time, would say he's number one.
He was active. He blew his shoulder out in training and then had to recover and is still coming back and fighting that fight.
So here's the argument. You could say that we don't know anything.
John Jones
you
is
could say we
active.
don't know. No, see, that's what you do. You talk over us, so we can't answer.
I apologize. You go ahead.
Okay, dubs all around. There you go. Listen, this is what you like to see, though. Like, fair play to Dana. There's not many league commissioners or promoters that are going to go back and forth with the media over stuff like this. So I actually like that there's a conversation and that Dana's willing to go back and forth. And honestly willing to be put in his place a little bit here. Be like, yo, all right, you just want to talk over us. But I like it. I like the back and forth. What I also want to say, too, is now that I think about it, and I'm not saying that John Jones beating Stipe Miocic is not impressive, because it is. Let's add more context. Stipe Miocic is in his 40s now. He is also coming off a loss to the same guy that Ciryl Gane lost to, that the UFC tries to actively bury and remove from history. That's Francis Ngannou. It is impressive, but it's, again, rehashing what Francis already did 2 to 3 to 4 years ago. In my opinion, if John wants that pound-for-pound number one, you may even give it to him if he beats Stipe. Even then, there's still a conversation to me, even though, yes, Stipe is one of the greatest heavyweights ever. He's not Stipe from 4 years ago. He's not Stipe from 6 years ago. Absolutely not. But I think that real, nail in the coffin, and one that I hope that we eventually get, is John Jones, Tom Aspinall. You beat Tom Aspinall at heavyweight right now? Not only if there was any more questions, which to me there isn't. John's already the GOAT. But if there were questions out there, that puts it away. It puts it to bed completely. But it absolutely makes you pound for pound number one, and I would say 1, 2, 3, 4 different eras in John's career, and that is GOAT status.
If he fought and we don't put him number one, then you have that argument to say you don't know what the hell you're talking about. We are all, I think everybody in this room is saying he's the greatest fighter of all time. And I think most people in this room would say he is the number one pound for pound fighter of all time. But you can't just sit on your laurels from something you did 3, 4, 5 years ago. When was
the Ciryl Gane fight?
Since Islam, he hasn't fought in 18 months.
Okay.
Okay, and it's going to be 20 months by the time he gets in the ring. So that, assuming he gets in the ring, right? We don't know he's going to be healthy. So all I think everybody is saying, and the argument against you, is the fact that most people who do pound for pound lists have a 1-year cutoff, unless they're, they had a fight scheduled at the time. So John fell out of pound for pound list because it was over a year and he didn't have a fight scheduled.
He did.
He doesn't have.
He did have a fight scheduled. And he got injured,
and so
and now he does have a fight scheduled now.
Yeah, Kevin's getting caught here using his own logic. So this is fair play. It's a point for Dana, right? Like, if you're putting all these qualifiers on pound for pound, like, oh, it's 12 months and you better have a fight scheduled, then yeah, you run into some logic issues with what you're saying to Dana. Because he's right. There was a fight scheduled for Stipe. He got hurt. So by, I guess, whoever's making these pound for pound lists own logic, then you start to run into the issue of, well, I guess we got to give him another 12 months. Right? And again, I don't even look at it that way. I look at it as like, okay, you're not penalizing John for getting injured, but you are rewarding people for fighting in the meantime, in between time.
This guy just said he knows he's fighting in November. Will I announce it? I said, I'll announce it when the whole card is, but everybody knows he's fighting. It's silly. And I don't know what this game is with everybody, but John Jones is the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world. Until this guy, and he has been he hasn't fought, what'd you say, 18 months since the Ciryl Gane fight?
18 months and then 1 in 4 years.
So 18 months, he moved up and he fought Cyril Gane and destroyed him in a weight class above him, who was the #1 guy in the world. And in the UFC.
I like that Dana clarified there that he's the #1 guy in the UFC, not the #1 guy in the world, because that man fights in the PFL. You have to point that out. That's a big counter to Dana's whole thing here. Right? Yeah, he's the #1 guy in your promotion, but he was the #2 guy in your promotion, or 3, or wherever you want to put him, right after he lost to the #1 guy. So John essentially just beat the loser or #2 guy, but the #1 guy was gone.
It's not like Jon Jones was not active and was not accepting fights. And I also believe, because I know how Jon Jones is, Jon Jones fights and beats Stipe. If he wins, I think he fights Aspinall.
That is all that we're asking for. Now, we are also just asking for that to be the first fight, but I understand, I guess, why John wants to fight Stipe. One, his legacy, beating arguably the best heavyweight in UFC history would obviously make John the best, and I guess maybe the UFC offered him more money to do that. I don't know, but it's clear to everyone, and I would hope that Dana would have this same thought, that Tom Aspinall right now is the better skilled opponent at heavyweight for Jon Jones. Does he offer as much to John's legacy? Maybe not in their eyes, but to me as a fan, and I'm sure the people that watch this sport as hardcore fans and even casual ones at this point, the casual fan has seen Tom Aspinall win the heavyweight belt and be in an octagon more than they've seen Stipe Miocic over the last 4 years. Does that mean they know his name as much as Stipe's? Maybe not. I don't know. But I will tell you, he's been in front of their eyes on a TV fighting more, and maybe, just maybe, that means something when it comes to John's legacy.
So everybody in this room thinks Aspinall is more highly rated than Stipe at this point. Stipe's reputation is fantastic, but he has not won a fight since he beat DC in 4 years. So that also plays into it, partially a factor, when you have a guy like Aspinall knocking Sergey Pavlovich out in a minute, Curtis Blades in less than a minute, et cetera, et cetera.
This is the point I wanted to see Dana answer. Let's take a look.
No, I don't disagree with you. But here's the flip side to that. So what do? A guy who's looked at as the greatest heavyweight in the UFC, right? This fight set up, Jon Jones gets hurt. Not his fault. He has to wait and go back into fucking training camp again. He was training. So do I just yank it away from Stipe and say, hey, go fuck yourself and sit on the sidelines for 2 more years? Or you know what I mean? If I did that, you guys would be like, oh, you disrespected the greatest heavyweight ever. And
that's not the media's fault, though. The media didn't ask for Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic. That was a Dana White choice. Dana made the fight. I don't know at the time it was made. And maybe you could say at the time it was made. I remember years ago when John was on his 3-year hiatus, ready to come to heavyweight, a lot of people did ask for the Stipe fight. That's when we wanted it. By the time it was made, it's still, okay, it's a fun fight. Yeah, we'll watch it. But at that point, you saw and we're starting to see the rise of Tom Aspinall to the point where Tom looked like the right guy to give that fight to. And if we're doing this as a sport, instead of just, the Kobe farewell tour for Stipe, he is coming off a loss for the belt. So again, getting another shot at the belt when there are potentially and honestly just more deserving contenders right now, like Tom Aspinall, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But Dana framing this like, oh, what am I supposed to tell Stipe? You? Well, you set up the fight, so that's a convenient way to answer how you're supposed to deal with Stipe after you've already promised him the fight.
And the answer to that would be, you should have had Stipe fight Aspinall or somebody else, right?
Yep.
In the interim, because how do you qualify for a title shot when you have not fought since, 2021, and you lost that fight? How do you qualify for a title shot sitting out for over 3 years and just sitting on the sidelines waiting when you're trying to say who is the best fighter in the world? Should you not be active and be competing and be beating? You said yourself, and Hunter has said that the UFC heavyweight division is the best it's ever been, right? So should he not be challenging himself against those fighters?
Whoa! From the clouds, baby. I mean, there's no other better way to put it. Like, for everything Dana wants to talk about shitting on Stipe and like, oh, well, I told him this is the next fight. Well, again, those are Dana White choices. Those are UFC choices. But there were other choices to make. When John got injured, you could have had Stipe fight someone else. Or before John and Stipe even got made and Tom Aspinall is sitting there, if you truly believe Stipe deserved the next shot at the belt, Tom Aspinall was there. That was the fight you could have made in the meantime. And then had John come up and challenge. And again, I think a lot of people agree here, but Dana White, and I guess for good reason, just doesn't want to say that Stipe only wanted to fight John and John only wanted to fight Stipe. And that's why they're doing this, because they wanted to do it years ago when John was still contemplating moving to heavyweight and he was trying to build himself the right way. That's what they wanted to do regardless. They wanted to do Francis and John, but that didn't work out. So this was the next best option in their minds, and that's not how a sport should work.
So I have two legends in the sport that wanted to fight each other. These guys are lined up. One guy gets hurt, and this is the fight that they both want. What do you do? You don't show the guys the respect. And I guarantee you this, if Stipe wins, Stipe's going to retire. You know what I mean? This will be Stipe's last fight. So are you, the media, telling me I should just tell Stipe to fuck off and, good luck to you, Stipe. Ride off into sunset. Go fight some fires, and that's a wrap for you, buddy, because John got hurt.
Then don't make it for the belt. That's the simplest thing. Strip John and don't make it for the belt. If it's all just about respect and, these two wanting to fight each other, then don't make it for the belt. Just have it be a super fight. You know what I mean? Hell, John can come right back, since this is the way we're booking things, if he loses and fight Aspinall for the belt, right? I mean, that's what it is. Just don't, that's the easiest answer to the question. If you want to make a super fight, there's no reason other than just these guys want to fight each other. Don't make it for the belt. Strip John, then appoint Aspinall, because he already should be the reigning heavyweight champion, based on the fact that John got injured and doesn't want to fight to unify the belts. And then the winner, if Stipe wins and he retires, okay, then the heavyweight division moves on without missing a beat, because you have your champion there rightfully, and not the guy that won it from John after losing to Francis and then has to go and turn the belt right back in after winning. It's not necessarily the same thing, but I remember Dana White getting upset with George St. Pierre for doing the same thing, like winning the belt and then handing it right back. It reset the division, and yeah, it freed up somebody to win the belt, but it doesn't give legitimacy and a lineage to the belt when you do stuff like that. And that's if Stipe wins, but it's the same sort of feeling if John wins, to me anyway.
If Stipe were to happen to win, does Aspinall become the full champion, given you
Well, then who knows too? Let's see if Stipe wins and Stipe feels great. Maybe Stipe does take the fight. I don't know. I'm just saying, me right here now, I think that if Stipe wins, Stipe probably retires. But you never know until the fight's over. Anything can happen in a fight. Stipe could go in there and win spectacularly, and he beats the greatest fighter of all time, and maybe he wants to test himself.
This is all great, what Dana's saying, if he didn't just 2 minutes before this say that Stipe was going to retire, if he won the fight or if he didn't. And again, this is the point of not having this for the belt. You shit on Tom Aspinall if Stipe wins, even worse, because essentially you're like, okay, there's our heavyweight champion. Hey, Stipe, appreciate you coming out. We'll take the belt from you now. Hey, Tom, now you're the heavyweight champion. All those fights that you won that were actually ranked opponents and people that were active on the roster and were making their way through heavyweight, they didn't make you the full champion. What made you the full champion is the other guy didn't want to defend it. That's boxing stuff, dude. That's the stuff that made boxing so weird.
But I made a deal with these two guys that they could fight each other, and one guy got hurt, now he's ready, and the fight's going to happen. And John Jones is the pound-for-pound best fighter.
There it is, man. Again, I don't think that we got anywhere, which is usually what happens in a debate, but at least you got to hear Dana's side of things, which in his own way, I guess it makes sense to him, but it's convoluted, and it's based on the fact that Dana is the one making decisions on who's fighting who, and also it takes in a lot of details and data from John's past that he doesn't allow to also be used against John, which is, again, a one-sided argument you're never going to win. But the point I think we get to here is this fight. Yes, John is the champion because he beat Cyril, and that was the fight they deemed worthy of the belt. But also, there's an interim belt out there. Either one of two things shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't have given Tom Aspinall an interim belt, or they should have stripped John and given Tom the right to fight for the actual heavyweight champion. Because this fight with Stipe, to me, does not add much more to John's pound-for-pound status. It will add to it, absolutely, just because of Stipe's legacy. But currently, the guy to fight has been Tom Aspinall. Until John beats him, I don't know that you can call him currently the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Yes, he's still the GOAT. Yes, he's still pound-for-pound the #1 of all time. But right now, that goes to Islam Makhachev. Change my mind in the comments, because I don't have the answers. Will John beat Stipe? Will Stipe beat John? Will John ever fight Tom Aspinall? I don't know, but guess we'll find out.